Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. My name is Ali and I'm an assistant professor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and it's such a pleasure to deliver this talk to you today at the International Summer School on ICT for Sustainability 2021. Today I'll be talking about the evolution of a specific strata of techniques that have been developed for reaching underserved communities, people who are low literate, non-tech savvy, low digitally literate, people who are visually impaired. So how do you create technologies to reach them? How do you scale such technologies? And then how do you sustain such technologies? How do you sustain those services that you create for reaching out to these audiences? So these are some of the readings that I would suggest for people who are interested in this domain and would like to follow up beyond what I'll be discussing in my talk. So the goal of my talk is just to get you excited enough so that you decide to go and read this and more literature in this domain. So if you have very little time, then I would recommend the first paper, which is just a 2-3 page CACM article, which will give you a summary of everything that has been done in this domain over the last 20 years or so. The second one is a book chapter, which is much more detailed, and it goes into a fair amount of detail of the various services that have been created, the reasons and the challenges that were met, and then why that evolution actually took place. Um, Here are some papers that I'll be referring to during my talk. There are many others that I have mentioned during the slides, but you can also access the detailed references by looking at the book chapter that I showed you on the previous slide. By the way, all of this is available online, so you can just search for these and you will find the papers, and you can download them either from my website or the websites of the people that I'll be referring to during the discussion. All right, so let's get to it. How do you reach people? If you want to reach people and provide them information or gather information from them or connect with them, what's the best mechanism that we have today? That's our internet, right? So the internet has truly transformed the way people participate in the information ecology and digital economy. You have your social media, your online discussion forums, your crowdsourcing marketplaces. So it's amazing. It's a great phenomena. The one caveat here is that the internet empowers people who enjoy access to it, which is unfortunately right now limited to people who are mostly urban, affluent, and literate. So the big question is anyone left out? So is there anyone who's offline, people who do not use internet? As a matter of fact, there's a big fraction of people in the world who belong to this category. So these stats are around a year old. I just looked them up, and still I could find, like, these are the ones that I still found. So I've just placed them here. They may have changed a little bit over the past few months, but it's a very good ballpark. 3.6 billion people in the world right now are offline. So this is roughly half of the world population, and these offline ones are not uniformly distributed across the different countries. So in the developed world, 13.4% of the world is offline. In the developing world, 53% is offline. And in the least developed countries, by the way, these are stats from the International Telecommunications Union. The link, you can find the link down below. The least developed countries, according to their listing, more than 80% of people in those countries are offline. The main reasons for why these populations are offline, so there could be either these people are too poor to afford internet-enabled devices, they're either too remote to access the internet, or too low literate or non-tech savvy to navigate the mostly text-driven internet, and also not having enough digital literacy and skills to operate digital devices could be another reason why populations could be offline. So it's people even having mechanisms to access internet but not having the skills or the understanding to use those devices, like for example the difference between a simple phone and a smartphone. So those kinds of problems also result in people being offline. All right, digging a little bit deeper into this, 13.7% of the world population comprises of non-literate adults. Two-thirds of these are women, and more men than women use the internet. So this gap is again smaller in developed countries and much larger in developing countries and the LDCs. So there are this disproportionate access is basically across across genders, it's across various demographics. Um, there are 285 million people in the world who are visually impaired, and 90% of them live in low-income settings. And all of these estimates, so they do not even count people who are low literate. We've talked about non-literate, but not, there are people who are low literate, people who belong to oral cultures, who are native speakers of unwritten languages, languages that do not have any written form. So interestingly, 46% of all languages in the world do not have a written form. By the way, these are fraction of languages, not fraction of the population. So there's a difference. So, but yeah, 46% of all languages do not have a written form. So how do you reach these populations with information when textual forms of information are clearly not very well suited for them? When you're offline, when you do not have access, what does it mean? So lack of access to information and connectivity, it could be a major impediment to your development. So when you don't have access to information about agriculture and farming and education and health and weather and so on and so forth, things that impact your everyday life, things that impact your business, your earning capability, your employability, all of these things can be measured. So lack of access to these forms of knowledge, forms of information could be a major impediment to development. So then the big question is, how do you reach these hard to reach populations? So your computers and laptops are clearly not visible. Your television and radio are not interactive. Smartphones are not always visible. And that's a whole another discussion, because smartphones are becoming very popular now. But having a smartphone does not necessarily mean that you're capable of navigating the more sophisticated interfaces which are available on them. But obviously this is one line of research. How do you make smartphones more accessible for people who belong to these categories that we have just discussed? The textual interfaces are problematic for the non-literate, but very quickly we do realize that these populations speak and listen. So this is the strata of technologies that I'll be talking about today, and so this is how they conduct their business. They speak and listen. This is how they live their lives. And most of them have access to some sort of a mobile phone, not necessarily a smartphone, but some form of a mobile phone. The global mobile phone penetration is around 73%. In developing countries, it's around 70%. So speech based interfaces over simple phones are a viable mechanism of reaching these low literate populations. So this was realized in the first decade of the current century. So around 2000 to 2005, we saw some initial services emerging in this domain. Around 2005, a major service that I'll be discussing very soon, that was created and launched in Pakistan, in rural Sindh. So we call these the first wave of speech-based services. So the goal here was to improve access. Now how do these services work? So almost all of them employ a technology called interactive voice response, so, or IVR for short. So IVR, so most of you, I think all of you have interacted with IVR services. So when you call your airline to book your tickets, or when you call your bank, you're greeted with an automated service which tells you to either press 1 to do this, press 2 to do that, or say this to do this, say that to do that, and so on. So those are that technology is known as the interactive voice response. So that has been the major fuel, that service has been the major backbone for almost all of the services that I'll be describing today. Only that these services are much more intelligent, much more adapted to low literate, non-tech savvy audiences. So with these services and with simple phones, you overcome the connectivity barriers because you're simply using ordinary phone calls. All of the interaction takes place over a phone call. You overcome the literacy barriers because you can always use local language content. So the machine speaks in the local language, and you can speak back in the local language as well in the full speech-to-speech interaction. Or mostly you're just required to just press keys from 1 to 9, or including 0 in some cases. And then you overcome the socioeconomic barriers by using toll-free numbers, or missed calls. So that's a very interesting mechanism that has been used quite a lot in developing countries. So missed call is where one person who does not have enough mobile balance, airtime balance, if they want to have a conversation with someone else, they just place a call to their number, to their friend's number, and quickly disconnect as soon as the other side starts ringing. So that's a signal to the friend, so please call me back. So that's known as a missed call. So missed calls are used a lot in the local cultures in many developing countries, and these have been employed a lot in these services as well, where user calls the service, places a missed call, and the service calls the user back, hence subsidizing the call cost for the user. So these services have been designed both. So these initial ones ones were designed for both information push and pull. So push is where the service calls the users to deliver the information. Pull is where the user calls the service and tries to gather a specific type of information. So as I said, Project Healthline was one of those initial services that was launched in interior Sindh, in the rural areas of Sindh in Pakistan. It was designed for community health workers to get up-to-date information about various diseases that were prevalent in that area so that they can properly advise their audience. These initial services, the first wave of speech-based services, uncovered a wide array of implementation, scalability, and sustainability challenges. So let's quickly talk about some of them. So it was assumed before the launch of these services that because it's voice-based and because it's simple phone-based, it will be obvious, like intuitively obvious to your audience, and they will figure out how to use these services. And that turned out to be an incorrect hypothesis. We found that you need to invariably train your low literate non-tech savvy audiences to use these services. So the initial services took the path of actually bringing people into the lab or going to their houses and giving them demos and training. The problem with in-person training is that it's not scalable. You can train 50 or 100 or 500 or whatever. You cannot train millions or like hundreds of millions of people. So the scale becomes a big limiting factor here. The second problem is the motivation and trust. You are asking these users to trust your service. They're gathering information, let's say, about agriculture or health. Why should they trust you? And why should they come up with the motivation to engage with your potentially involved voice-based interactions? And then how do you keep them oriented and motivated and grounded so that they can understand what's going on? Psychologically, they are thinking of the interaction as having a conversation with a person, not with a machine. They're not familiar with that. So keeping them oriented, motivated, and grounded is a big challenge. Finally, the third big hurdle that was found was the uptake and spread hurdle. So how do you spread your services and advertise them to populations which are underconnected by definition? How do you reach them with these services? So the one strategy that worked and that actually led into the second wave of these services, that was entertainment. So the second wave of services was all about scale and sustained spread. So how do you sustain a constant supply of new users who are able to use your service and are motivated enough to use your service? So the hypothesis here was that for entertainment, users would overcome all sorts of interface barriers. So they would learn the service themselves because they're having fun. For fun, they will learn anything they have to. For entertainment also, you don't need to convince the users or make any extra effort to keep them grounded. You just need to create a simple enough interface that they can understand and which is fun for them. And finally, when you create something which is simple and fun, users themselves would become your spreaders. They would spread the service to others. So the virality became then the mechanism of the sustained spread of the spread of the service. So I'll talk about one specific service in that regard, the first service that was created to do that. So the strategy here was to use viral entertainment as a vehicle to disseminate development-related useful information. So the idea was to create a fun service, to train the users, to connect with them, to spread to them, and then use that platform to disseminate more development related, more useful information to the user. So one is the conduit and the other is the payload that goes through that conduit to the users. So this is the service, Polly in English, Mia Mittu in Urdu. It was launched here in Pakistan. So Polly is a telephone-based, voice-based service which allows users to make a short recording of their voice, modify it using a bunch of funny voice modifications, and send the modified version to friends. So that was it. That was the simple idea. And once users get attached to Polly, they start using it. Then on top of Polly, they're exposed to more development-related services like job services or health services or maternal health information and so on and so forth. So in the next slide, I'll show you a brief demo of a typical user interaction with Polly, just so that you can get an idea of how these services work.
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम। अब आप अपनी आवाज़ को तरह तरह के दिलचस्प अंदाज में बदल सकते हैं। बस बीप की आवाज़ के बाद कुछ भी कहें और हैश का बटन दबाएं। हेलो आरिफ, क्या हाल है? जॉब पे गए हो या नहीं, या घर पे ही रोटियां तोड़ रहे हो? क्या आप अपनी दिलचस्प अंदाज में बदली हुई आवाज़ सुनने के लिए तैयार हैं? ये लीजिए।
हेलो आरिफ, क्या हाल है? जॉब पे गए हो या नहीं, या घर पे रोटियां तोड़ रहे हो?
दोबारा रिकॉर्ड करने के लिए 0 दबाएं, दोबारा सुनने के लिए 1 दबाएं, यह आवाज़ किसी को भेजने के लिए 2 दबाएं, अगली आवाज़ सुनने के लिए 3 दबाएं, मुलाजमत के इश्तिहारात मुफ्त सुनने के लिए 5 दबाएं, जिन्हें भेजना चाहते हैं उनका नंबर मिलाएं और आखिर में हैश का बटन दबाएं। बीप की आवाज़ के बाद अपना नाम बोलें, क्योंकि आपकी आवाज़ के साथ आपका नाम भी भेजा जाएगा।
फहद।
और भी किसी को भेजने के लिए 1 दबाएं, वरना 2 दबाएं। शुक्रिया, मियाँ मिट्ठू जल्द ही आपका पैगाम पहुंचा देगा। अब आप अपनी बाकी शरारत भरी आवाज़ें सुनें।
हेलो।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मियाँ मिट्ठू को आपके लिए एक पैगाम दिया गया है। भेजने वाले ने मियाँ मिट्ठू को अपना नाम बताया है
फहद।
और वो पैगाम ये है।
हेलो आरिफ, क्या हाल है? जॉब पे गए हो या नहीं, या घर पे रोटियां तोड़ रहे हो?
इस पैगाम के भेजने वाले का फ़ोन नंबर सुनने के लिए 0 दबाएं, पैगाम दोबारा सुनने के लिए 1 दबाएं, दोस्तों को भेजने के लिए 2 दबाएं, जवाब देने के लिए। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। अब आप घर बैठे अखबारात के ताज़ा तरीन इश्तिहारात बिल्कुल मुफ्त सुन सकते हैं।
यह इश्तिहार 26 अगस्त 2012 को जंग अखबार में दिया गया। लाहौर डिफेंस में ड्राइवर की असामी खाली है। इस मुलाजमत के ख्वाहिशमंद अफराद इस नंबर पर रब्ता करें 55503015।
All right, so you have just seen the demo and you have seen that the first development service that we used was a job audio browser. So the idea there was that in the daily Pakistani newspapers, there are many ads which are for people who are low literates. For example, job ads for maids and gardeners and guards and so on. And ironically, they cannot read those ads. So we thought, okay, just let's record these ads in our own voice and make them available over Poly for audio browsing. So that was our first development related service launched over Poly. Poly was launched just by giving its phone number to 5 office workers. So these were low literate office boys working in a local university. We just handed over the phone numbers of Poly to these users without explaining what the service is about. We just asked them to call it and see what happens. After that, and without any other advertisement, within a year, Poly had received 636,000 phone calls, which were placed by 165,000 users. And at its peak, it was spreading to 1,000 new people per day. So, and of these, 34,000 people also started using the job search service. And they listened 386,000 times to the 728 job ads available in the system. And 19,000 users forwarded these ads to their friends as well. So clearly we saw the success of the scalability of the services, the virality of the service. So in the paper, if you look at the paper, you'll find a lot more detail about the demographics. Poly primarily reached low literate young men, and this was the demographic that it primarily reached. There were around 10% female users. There were also some people who were more literate, but mostly it had appealed for people who were low literate. There were also some blind users who started using the service, all virally recruited. There was no specific recruitment or advertisement done for Poly. All right, now here I will discuss now the next challenge. So let's make our way into the next challenge. So here you see a user retention graph. On the horizontal axis, you see the days post first encounter with Poly, and on the vertical axis, you see the fraction of users who are still active. So you can see here that on the first day, everyone is active. All users are using the service. On the second day of use, less than 40%, so around 30% of users return to Poly. On the third day, less than 20% come back to Poly. So you can see that the enthusiasm is lost very quickly, and this is true for all forms of simple entertainment because the appeal wears off. So you can play for voice modifications for only so long. The other thing that's to be noticed here is that a few people continue using these services long term, and that's a whole separate discussion. These users started using Poly as a voice messaging service, a free voice messaging service. However, the big challenge that was uncovered here was how to retain the acquired user base. How do you sustain that user base now that they are on your platform? Now, many groups around the world tried to solve that in many different ways, which also led to many other new goals and challenges that was added to this. So one is obviously how do you retain your users? Another one is how do you ensure a continuous supply of fresh content? So how do you sustain new content on the platform? On Poly, it's just your voice and modification, but maybe more needs to be there. And then as these platforms grew to thousands of users, how do you moderate that audio content which is coming in from the users? How do you index it, search it, categorize it? And how do you filter it to make sure that abusive speech and hate speech does not make its way, or misinformation does not make its way through the platform? Because we are talking about languages of the developing regions, you do not have your automatic speech recognition or natural language processing mechanisms already figured out for these languages. So another goal of such services also became to gather those data sets, those corpora for those local languages, so that you can come up with these machine learning techniques. But invariably, most of these groups, like almost all of them, reached that same consensus, and they came up with a strategy of using social connectivity, creating a social platform. Think of like a voice-based Reddit over simple phones that's accessed over phone calls. That's essentially the core theme of all of these services. So there were services like Mobile Wani and Sangeet Swara and CGNet Swara, which were launched in India, Bang, which was launched out of my lab in Pakistan. So I'll talk about Bang just to give you an idea of these services. I would encourage you to read the papers on these different services. Sangeet Swara was actually one of the services that was the first one to come up with community-based moderation of content. And so yeah, these are all great services and very interesting to read about. All right, so Bang, the service that we launched in Pakistan, so the goal was to provide social connectivity to underconnected populations, to give them a voice and a digital social identity. But within that, there were some specific goals. One of the goals was to spread virally like Poly, to engage the users and to retain them, which Poly was not able to do. Another goal was to encourage dialogue and diversity of content. So these things were being dictated by our experiences in the field. We wanted people to talk. We wanted people to do more than just fun. So have conversations, have discussions, make it like a full-blown social network. We also wanted to involve the community in content management. However, we also wanted to make sure that the majority does not suppress the voice of the minority. Say we have 10% females on the platform, and whatever content they contribute, the male members, when they like or dislike the content, they vote it down and the content is just removed from all listings. So now here you're suppressing the majority, suppressing the voice of the minorities. And this is true for any other demographics, gender, race, religion, anything. So we wanted to give mechanisms in the platform that that allow people to access that less popular type of content. And then finally, one of the goals of Bang was also to gather enough data to start training speech and natural language processing models for the local languages. All right, so here you see, so Bang is a voice-based, telephone-based social platform that allows audio content creation and sharing amongst its open community of users. So the users can post audio messages, they can play messages posted by others, and after each message they can either like it or dislike it, or they can report abuse, for example hate speech or abusive speech or something else, some other problem with the message. They can comment, post audio comments on the messages, and they can share the messages with others, pretty much like Poly, where you enter your friend's phone number and the message is forwarded to the friend. In the sorting mechanisms, where you're going through the playlist of all messages, we allowed recency. So listen to it by recency, most recent content first, by popularity, most upvoted content first, or by trending, the most recently upvoted content first. So it was typically last 24 hours, so most popular content in the last 24 hours. Now, these things allowed us to achieve the various goals that I've stated in the previous slide. So the community-supported content moderation was coming in through these likes, dislikes, and report abuse. As soon as some content was reported for abuse enough times, our moderators, expert moderators, listened to that content to figure out what was wrong with it, and if indeed something was wrong with it, they removed it from the platform. Then the comments, as we found out later, motivated users to keep returning to the service to figure out how the comments have been responded to. The sharing feature led to viral spread of the service, and the sorting by recency, which did not involve any voting in between, to make the content available. So that allowed users to access the less popular content on the platform. Obviously, the abusive content is removed from all listings based on the initial user reports, and afterwards when the expert moderators verify that indeed the content has some problems in it. All right, so here is the call flow diagram. I am not showing you the demo in the interest of time. So here you can see that a user places a missed call to the platform, and then after that, Bang calls the user back and then allows the user to either record their own message, to play messages recorded by others, and they can sort them by popularity, recency, trending, or retrieve a message, a particular message, by entering its code. So users were informed about the code of each message that they recorded. And then finally, they could also play their own previously recorded messages, their own recorded posts. We call them bangs. It's like tweets on a Twitter. So so on Bang you record bangs. So you could play your own bangs, and you could hear like the number of votes and comments and listen to the comments which were produced on them. And after playing each message, you could either like it, dislike it, report abuse, comment, forward to friends, or go to the next message. So this was the interface for Bang. So within 8 months, that was the total deployment of Bang. Bang had accumulated more than 269,000 phone calls by 10,000 users, which included 44,000 posts. These posts were played close to 3 million times by 10,000 users. So there was enthusiastic use of the platform. We gathered more than 1,000 hours of speech data of more than 10 local languages through this deployment. And by the way, 10 is a very conservative low number here, because there were many languages which were categorized as others. In Pakistan, there are 71 local languages, and my team who were analyzing these posts only spoke a max of 10 languages between them. So they could not even identify languages beyond. So there were other languages beyond these 10. The interactions also were very rich in terms of the votes and up and down votes, the abuse reports. There were 124,000 voice comments. These posts were shared 94,000 times by people with their friends. All right, so let's go to the main question that we had earlier, because of which we saw this branch of evolution, the user retention. And here you see again a user retention plot, and you can see on the horizontal axis the days post first encounter with the service, and on the vertical axis the fraction of users who are still active. And here you see two different launches of Poly compared against three different launches of Bang. So Bang was launched multiple times, and you can see that here is Poly, like the two lines that you see underneath are Poly, and you can see that the user retention of Bang is way higher as compared to Poly. So after 27 days, where Poly is less than 0.5% of users are still active, with Bang it's close to 20% of users who are still using the platform at max. So social networking led to higher user retention compared to peer-to-peer entertainment driven messaging. So yeah, now let's move on quickly to the next challenge, the challenge of financial sustainability. How do you financially sustain these speech-based telephone services for the underserved population? So many paths have been taken. Services like Khajura, Tisan, and Mobile Wani have used advertising revenues to subsidize the cost of voice calls. Services like Ila Digezo in Africa and HNI 321 have partnered with government agencies and mobile network operators to subsidize the cost of the calls. Then there was another innovation. Respeak and Bespeak started using crowdsourcing, which is the completion of large scale, hard to automate tasks while allowing people to earn money. So this mechanism, they used it for transcribing audio content. So people used to basically repeat whatever was played to them, in that they said it more clearly and also increase the amount of speech data that's available for that recording, helping in the automatic transcription of that recording. So Respeak, Bespeak, and other services in that line of services were focused on automatic transcription of audio, which is a major task in this data science, in this big data era. And then finally, the final service, Karamat here, is the first service to my knowledge which broke the airtime subsidy barrier. So it's again a crowdsourcing platform, but does not subsidize the airtime costs for the user. So users pay for the airtime costs themselves. Let's talk a little bit about this service. This was, by the way, a collaborative work between my lab and Professor Jay Chen's lab, whom you have heard right before my talk. This was a joint project between our two labs. All right, so Karamat is a general purpose voice-based crowdsourcing platform for low resource workers that does not require users to have access to a smartphone or the internet. So the requesters, people who want to post tasks, they create tasks using a web interface. The workers get to do those tasks by using an IVR interface, so over a simple phone, over a call. So they receive free pre-screening over early media. So this is where we actually wanted to save the user from spending any extra money than they had to. So once a user calls in, based on their phone number, we check whether there are any new tasks available for that user that they can attempt. If not, we simply disconnect it before even connecting the call. So that's known as the early media stage, where you hear the ringing of the phone. So that's early media. You can play other things there as well. So we actually played prompts before the call connection to the user that you have already attempted all tasks for today, and there are no more tasks for you, and so on and so forth. Um, then within the interface, after the user has been admitted, they can browse and attempt tasks by recency or by reward. So the maximum reward amount first, or the most recent task first. And then they receive the payments for their tasks as mobile top-ups. So the interface of Karamat supports various types of question types. You can create surveys. The requesters can create surveys using binary, yes/no questions, multiple choice questions, or ask the users to make a short recording of 30 seconds or a long recording of 60 seconds to give their responses. We also allow dynamic flow, which means that tasks and questions can be conditioned on previous responses of the user. So they're either their demographics, which they have provided in the initial tasks, or some other forms, like for example the answer to a previous question dictates whether the next question is relevant to that user or not. So Karamad remained active in Pakistan for 6 months. There was no airtime subsidy. Users paid upfront for their airtime costs, and they were only paid back afterwards for their services, sometimes even after a couple of weeks. There were 19 tasks which were created and placed on Karamad. There were 958 unique users who placed 16,000 phone calls. 725 users attempted at least one task, and 671 users completed at least one task during that time. So there were 4,000 survey responses in total, around 213 responses per survey on average. There were overall 43,000 answers to the 267 questions, which were a part of those 19 tasks. We gathered 16.20 hours of speech data and 1360 audio translations through this. So these were the different kinds of tasks that were placed on Karamat. So users spent 24,000 minutes, on average 32 minutes per worker on Karamat. They spent 98,000 rupees out of their own pocket to interact with the service, and they earned 328,000 rupees through the platform. So this is the crowdsourcing platform that was launched, and we found it to be a great success in terms of a sustainable service, although we did not reach the last mile where we asked the requesters to start paying for the tasks that they post on the service, and this is the very next step that we want to go for. But we have seen, at least from the worker side, there is enough enthusiasm and enough motivation to even pay for tasks even before they're paid back for their services. So lessons through Karamat, here are some of them. So I'll just very quickly skim through them. So contrary to prevailing norms, Karamat was deployed without any airtime subsidies, without any social features, without any spreading mechanisms or advertisements. But still, we found that paid crowd work can garner trust, engagement, spread, retention, and self-training. The sensitivity of crowd workers to task prices needs further investigation, like how much should we pay for the tasks? How much should the requester pay for posting a survey? Those things still need to be figured out, and obviously they will be customized to the location where the services would be launched. The task consistency, which is like when the same question is presented to the user multiple times, whether they answer it the same way. And there are many things which can impact that. A user who's not very serious in answering, from all the way to whether the user is completely confused about the question. So we found very high task consistencies in binary questions and open-ended audio questions, but lower consistencies for the multiple choice questions. And there are multiple solutions that we have suggested in the paper about this low task consistency for the multiple choice questions. The unique values of this platform include the new opportunities for daily wage workers during lockdown, and for conducting remote surveys, and for creating for figuring out this to be the right modality. Asynchronous modality might be the right modality for asking more sensitive questions. We did ask people sensitive questions about their health, about their everyday routine, and we wanted to figure out whether they're comfortable answering those questions. They were clearly informed that they were under no obligation to answer those questions. However, they still went ahead and answered those questions and became a part of those, volunteered to become a part of those surveys. So So these are some of the unique things which are unique values which such platforms provide, in terms of crowd working and in terms of reaching these populations. So I'll stop here. So this is the state of the art as far as the speech-based services for providing information access and connectivity to low literate and non-tech savvy audiences goes. I am really looking forward to interacting with you in the question answer session. And until then, take care. Bye bye.